Have you ever felt unqualified for a great calling? Doubted your own voice, your capacity for leadership? And yet, amidst your hesitations, felt a greater force pushing you toward a destiny that seemed utterly impossible? A helpless baby abandoned in the treacherous waters of the Nile, a prince raised in the opulence of Pharaoh's palace, an unlikely shepherd exiled in the wilderness. From paralyzing fear to unshakable faith, from the shackles of slavery to the promise of freedom, who would ultimately become the liberator of millions? Today, we're diving deep into the life of a man who faced all of this and more. This is the extraordinary story of Moses, from the river's edge to the cleft of the rock. Prepare to witness how an ordinary man, with all his doubts and imperfections, was chosen for the most monumental of missions, and how his epic journey might just echo in your own soul. Let's begin. Part 1. The Prince of the Nile. In ancient Egypt, the sun beat down relentlessly on a land forged by the mighty Nile. Its banks, lined with towering reeds and bustling with life, also bore witness to immense suffering. The Hebrews, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had multiplied greatly, their numbers threatening the security of a new Pharaoh. Driven by fear, he commanded a brutal decree. Every Hebrew boy who is born, you shall cast into the Nile. The air was thick with the wails of mothers, the cries of despair echoing through mud-brick homes. But in the midst of this darkness, a woman named Jochebed, of the tribe of Levi, gave birth to a beautiful son. For 3 months she hid him, every rustle of the wind, every knock at the door, a terrifying threat. Her heart ached with a mother's desperate love, knowing she could not conceal him forever. With a courage born of faith, she fashioned a basket of papyrus reeds, waterproofed it with tar and pitch, and carefully laid her tiny son inside. It was an act of profound trust, a fragile vessel adrift on the very river that sought to claim his life. His older sister, Miriam, watched from a distance, her young heart pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate hope as the basket drifted silently among the reeds, a tiny, vulnerable speck on the vast river. Miraculously, the basket floated directly into the path of Pharaoh's own daughter, who had come to the Nile to bathe. When she saw the weeping infant, compassion, a rare light in that cruel palace, stirred within her. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she realized, a flash of recognition in her eyes. Miriam, seizing the moment, bravely stepped forward. "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" she boldly asked. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and Miriam, with joyful haste, brought her own mother, Jochebed, to nurse her son, a divine twist of fate, bringing the very child marked for death back into the arms of his own mother by the hand of the oppressor's daughter. When the boy grew older, Jochebed brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." And so Joseph, the Hebrew baby, was raised in the glittering golden palace of Egypt, amidst the very people who enslaved his own kin. He learned the wisdom of the Egyptians, walked among kings, and was trained in their military might, a prince in a foreign land. But deep within him, perhaps a whisper from his birth mother, a memory of injustice, or a divine calling, stirred. The seed of his true identity, a Hebrew, was planted, destined to one day confront the world he now inhabited. Part 2. The Shepherd in the Desert. Years passed, perhaps 4 decades, and Moses, now a man of 40, was no longer content within the gilded cage of the palace. His heart yearned for his people, the enslaved Hebrews. He saw their brutal suffering, the lash of the Egyptian taskmasters, the crushing weight of their labor. One day, his simmering rage boiled over. He witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave mercilessly. In a rash act of righteous fury, Moses looked around, and seeing no one, he struck the Egyptian down and buried him in the sand. He thought his deed was hidden, but secrets in a land filled with whispers are rarely kept. The next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. "Why are you striking your companion?" he challenged. One sneered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses' heart sank. His act was known. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped him, for he knew Pharaoh would seek his life. And indeed, Pharaoh did. Moses, once a revered prince, became a fugitive. He fled Egypt, leaving behind the only life he had ever known, crossing the vast, unforgiving desert into the land of Midian. The sands stretched endless, the scorching sun his only companion. Here he met Reuel, the priest of Midian, and found solace and a new purpose. He married Zipporah, Reuel's daughter, and settled into the quiet, humble life of a shepherd. For another 40 years, Moses watched over sheep, far from the grand palaces and political intrigue. He wandered the vast, silent wilderness, its solitude perhaps a crucible, shaping him, stripping away the Egyptian pride, and preparing him for a calling he couldn't yet fathom. The desert was his classroom, patience his teacher, and the vast, starry sky his cathedral. He was 80 years old, a forgotten man, an unlikely candidate for anything great. Part 3. The Burning Bush. One ordinary day, as Moses led his flock to the far side of the wilderness, he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. The sun was high, the air still, broken only by the bleating of sheep. Then something extraordinary happened. He trembled, dropping to his knees. "Here I am," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The voice, profound and powerful, continued, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses, overwhelmed, hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. He saw a bush, blazing with fire, yet remarkably, it was not consumed. Curiosity, a spark of the divine, drew him closer. He approached, mesmerized by the impossible sight. Then, from the heart of the flames, a voice called to him, "Moses, Moses." The voice then revealed its identity and its purpose. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their groaning, and have come down to deliver them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Moses listened, his heart pounding, a mixture of awe and terror. But then came the shocking, impossible command, "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people the Israelites out of Egypt." Moses, a humble shepherd, was utterly bewildered. "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He stammered, his voice laced with doubt. He, the man who fled Pharaoh, was now commanded to confront him. "I will be with you," God promised, a voice of quiet thunder. But Moses, still grappling with the enormity of the task, offered one objection after another. "What if they don't believe me? I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." God, with infinite patience, reminded him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." And as a sign, God performed miracles before him, turning his staff into a serpent, his hand leprous, and then clean. Finally, God allowed his brother Aaron to be his spokesman. The encounter at the burning bush had forever changed Moses. From a forgotten shepherd, he was now God's chosen messenger, burdened with a mission that seemed insurmountable, but backed by an unstoppable power. Part 4. Confronting Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron, now armed with divine authority and miraculous signs, returned to Egypt, a land still groaning under the heel of oppression. Their first task, to gather the elders of Israel, who, upon seeing the signs and hearing God's promise, bowed down and worshipped. Hope, a fragile seedling, began to sprout in the hearts of the enslaved. Then came the inevitable, terrifying confrontation. Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh, not as humble petitioners, but as bold messengers of the Almighty. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh, arrogant and unyielding, scoffed. Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. Instead of relenting, Pharaoh intensified the Hebrews' suffering, commanding them to make bricks without straw, crushing their spirits further. The people, in their despair, turned on Moses and Aaron, accusing them of making their plight worse. Moses, burdened by their suffering, cried out to God, questioning the very mission. But God's resolve was unwavering. One by one, he unleashed a series of terrifying plagues upon Egypt, each one a direct assault on the Egyptian gods and Pharaoh's perceived power. Moses, resolute, stood firm, delivering God's message with increasing authority. Pharaoh, desperate, offered compromises. Go, but leave your children. Go, but leave your flocks. But Moses refused, knowing God's demand was absolute. All the people, all their possessions. The stage was set for the final devastating blow, a plague that would shatter Pharaoh's will and pave the way for freedom. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs swarmed every home. Gnats and flies infested the land. Livestock perished. Boils afflicted the people. Hail and fire rained down. Locusts devoured every green thing, and a thick, palpable darkness enveloped Egypt for 3 days. With each plague, Pharaoh's heart, a monument of stubborn pride, hardened. He would feign agreement, only to renege when the immediate threat passed. His resistance a desperate act against divine will. The tension mounted with each passing affliction. The Egyptians begged Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, terrified by the unfolding catastrophe. Part 5. The Passover and Exodus. The final plague, the most terrifying of all, was the death of the firstborn throughout Egypt. But for the Israelites, God provided a way of salvation. They were to sacrifice a lamb, smear its blood on their doorposts, and eat the roasted lamb with unleavened bread. When I see the blood, God declared, I will pass over you. That night, as the angel of death swept through Egypt, striking down every firstborn from Pharaoh's son to the firstborn of the lowest servant, a chilling wail of grief rose from every Egyptian home. But in the homes marked by blood, there was silence and life. Pharaoh, utterly broken by this final, catastrophic loss, finally capitulated. In the dead of night, he summoned Moses and Aaron. Get up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go. And also bless me. The Egyptians, desperate to be rid of them, urged them out, even giving them silver and gold and clothing, a fulfillment of God's promise. And so, after 430 years of bitter slavery, the Israelites marched out of Egypt, not as scattered fugitives, but as a vast multitude, 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, carrying their unleavened dough and the bones of Joseph, whose dying wish was now fulfilled. God himself led them, a pillar of cloud by day to guide their way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light, making their journey safe through the wilderness. Their freedom, hard-won and miraculous, was finally realized, the taste of liberation sweet in their mouths. But Pharaoh, in a final surge of hardened pride, soon regretted his decision. What have we done? He cried, realizing he had released his vast workforce. He mustered his entire army, 600 of his best chariots, thousands of horsemen, and pursued the fleeing Israelites, eager to drag them back into bondage. The dust clouds of his chariots grew closer, threatening to engulf the newly freed people. Part 6. The Red Sea Miracle. The Israelites found themselves trapped, a vast, terrified multitude, caught between the relentless pursuit of Pharaoh's army and the impassable barrier of the Red Sea. Panic erupted. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? They cried out to Moses, their faith, so recently kindled, now faltering under the shadow of imminent death. A powerful east wind began to blow, relentlessly, all through the night, pushing back the waters, dividing the sea. The vast expanse of the Red Sea split, creating a dry pathway in the middle, with towering walls of water on both sides. It was an awe-inspiring, impossible sight, a path to freedom where none existed moments before. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses, facing the despair of his people and the roar of the approaching chariots, did not falter. His faith was a rock. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then, at God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God, the master of creation, acted. And God, the master of creation, acted. A powerful east wind began to blow relentlessly all through the night, pushing back the waters, dividing the sea. The vast expanse of the Red Sea split, creating a dry pathway in the middle, with towering walls of water on both sides. It was an awe-inspiring, impossible sight, a path to freedom where none existed moments before. The Israelites, a nation on the move, walked across on dry ground, light from the pillar of fire illuminating their path. As the last Israelite reached the other side, Pharaoh's army, blinded by their rage and the deceptive darkness, charged headlong into the newly formed seabed, determined to reclaim their slaves. But as the Egyptians reached the middle of the sea, God caused their chariot wheels to come off, creating chaos and confusion. "Let's get away from the Israelites," they cried. "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then, at God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea once more. The massive walls of water, held back by divine power, crashed down with thunderous force, engulfing Pharaoh's entire army, every chariot, every horseman. Not a single one survived. The sun rose on a new day, revealing the bodies of their oppressors washed ashore, a stark testament to God's absolute power and their definitive freedom. The Israelites, witnessing this incredible deliverance, burst into triumphant song, singing praises to the Lord, their hearts filled with awe and profound gratitude. Part 7. The Wilderness Journey. Freed from Egypt, the Israelites faced a new, daunting challenge: the vast, unforgiving wilderness. It was a land of harsh realities, scorching sun, barren landscapes, and an urgent lack of food and water. Almost immediately, their faith was tested. They grumbled and complained, longing for the fleshpots of Egypt, forgetting the brutal slavery they had escaped. "What shall we drink?" they cried, thirst overwhelming them. But God, patient and merciful, provided for his people in miraculous ways. When they cried for water, Moses struck a rock, and fresh water gushed forth from the dry ground. When they hungered, God sent manna from heaven each morning, a fine, flaky substance that tasted like wafers with honey, and quails at night, covering the camp like a blanket. Their clothes and sandals did not wear out for 40 years. It was a daily testament to God's faithful provision, teaching them absolute reliance on him. Moses, as their leader, bore the immense burden of guiding this massive, often rebellious nation. He spent countless hours interceding for them, mediating disputes, and seeking God's guidance. While Moses was on the mountain, they pressured Aaron to build a golden calf, bowing down to an idol they had seen in Egypt. God's wrath flared, but Moses, demonstrating his profound love for his people, interceded passionately, pleading for their forgiveness. His leadership was a constant dance between guiding a stiff-necked people and faithfully representing a holy God. The wilderness journey was not just a physical trek. It was a spiritual pilgrimage, a prolonged lesson in obedience, trust, and the painful process of becoming God's chosen people. It was a lonely, often frustrating task, but his commitment remained unwavering. He led them to Mount Sinai, a mountain shrouded in thick cloud, thunder, and lightning, where God descended in a fiery presence. Here Moses ascended the mountain, entering the very presence of God to receive the 10 Commandments, engraved on tablets of stone. These laws were not merely rules. They were a covenant, a divine blueprint for a holy nation, establishing their relationship with God and with one another. Yet, even with God's majestic presence among them, the Israelites quickly faltered. While Moses was on the mountain, they pressured Aaron to build a golden calf, bowing down to an idol they had seen in Egypt. God's wrath flared, but Moses, demonstrating his profound love for his people, interceded passionately, pleading for their forgiveness. His leadership was a constant dance between guiding a stiff-necked people and faithfully representing a holy God. The wilderness journey was not just a physical trek. It was a spiritual pilgrimage, a prolonged lesson in obedience, trust, and the painful process of becoming God's chosen people. Part 8. Doubts, Discipline, and Dying Hope. The wilderness journey was also marked by Moses' own struggles and the heavy cost of leadership. Despite his profound relationship with God, Moses was still human, prone to moments of doubt and anger. God delivered a heartbreaking sentence. Moses, the very man who led them out of Egypt, would not enter the promised land. He would only see it from afar. Imagine the weight of that news, to lead a people for 40 arduous years, to endure their rebellion and God's judgment, only to be denied the ultimate fulfillment of the promise. At one point, when the people complained bitterly for water, God commanded Moses to speak to a rock, and it would yield water. But in his frustration, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff, saying, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" By doing so, he showed anger, took credit for God's miracle, and disobeyed God's precise instruction. For this act, which did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, God delivered a heartbreaking sentence. Moses, the very man who led them out of Egypt, would not enter the promised land. They fought battles, faced venomous snakes, and endured periods of deep discouragement. Moses appointed judges and leaders to share the burden, but the ultimate responsibility rested heavily on his shoulders. He remained a faithful intercessor, a tireless teacher, and a beacon of God's presence, even as the destination remained just out of reach for him personally. He would only see it from afar. Imagine the weight of that news, to lead a people for 40 arduous years, to endure their rebellion and God's judgment, only to be denied the ultimate fulfillment of the promise. The journey continued, punctuated by more rebellions, more miraculous provisions, and more lessons learned through hardship. They fought battles, faced venomous snakes, and endured periods of deep discouragement. Moses appointed judges and leaders to share the burden, but the ultimate responsibility rested heavily on his shoulders. He remained a faithful intercessor, a tireless teacher, and a beacon of God's presence, even as the destination remained just out of reach for him personally. The wilderness refined the Israelites, stripping away their slave mentality, forging them into a new generation ready to inherit the promise. As the final year of their wandering drew to a close, Moses, old and wise, gathered the people. He delivered powerful sermons, recounting their history, reiterating God's laws, and urging them to remember the covenant. His words, recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, were a final, passionate plea for obedience and faithfulness before they entered the land he could only gaze upon. Part 9. The View from Mount Nebo. The moment arrived. After 40 years of wandering, battles, and divine instruction, the Israelites stood on the plains of Moab, on the eastern side of the Jordan River. The promised land stretched before them, a fertile expanse flowing with milk and honey. But for Moses, The journey was ending. God called him to the summit of Mount Nebo, to the peak of Pisgah. From this high vantage point, God showed him the entire land, Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean. See the Negev and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms as far as Zoar. Every promise, every vision, every dream of a homeland lay spread out beneath him, shimmering under the sun. This is the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. God declared, I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it. Moses, the great prophet, the faithful servant, the reluctant leader, stood on that mountain, gazing at the culmination of his life's work, a land he would never set foot in. It was a profound, bittersweet moment, the ultimate act of self-sacrifice and obedience. He was more than a leader. He was an intermediary between God and his people, a man whose life embodied the very essence of trust, obedience, and the incredible power of God working through an imperfect vessel. His legacy was the deliverance of a nation, the giving of the law, and the profound example of a man who wrestled with God and faithfully completed his divine mission, even if it meant sacrificing his ultimate desire. At 120 years old, his eyes undimmed and his strength unabated, Moses died there on Mount Nebo, just as the Lord had said. God himself buried him in a valley in Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. The Israelites mourned Moses for 30 days. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was more than a leader. He was an intermediary between God and his people, a man whose life embodied the very essence of trust, obedience, and the incredible power of God working through an imperfect vessel. His legacy was the deliverance of a nation, the giving of the law, and the profound example of a man who wrestled with God and faithfully completed his divine mission, even if it meant sacrificing his ultimate desire. Part 10. Lessons from Moses' life. Moses' story is an epic that resonates through the ages, a tale of a reluctant hero, divine power, and the challenging path to freedom. His life teaches us God uses the unqualified. Moses doubted his own ability to speak and lead. Yet God chose him for the greatest deliverance in history. When you feel inadequate for a task, facing imposter syndrome or deep self-doubt, Moses' story reminds us that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Your weaknesses don't disqualify you. They become canvases for his strength. Obedience is key. Moses' journey was defined by obedience, even when it was difficult or dangerous. His one act of disobedience at the rock, however, had profound consequences. This teaches us the critical importance of listening carefully and obeying God's specific instructions, acknowledging that even small deviations can lead to significant outcomes. It also highlights that even the most faithful can stumble, and grace is always needed. Leadership is service. Moses endured incredible hardship, constant complaints, and immense pressure, always serving his people and God. True leadership, as demonstrated by Moses, isn't about power or prestige. It's about selfless service, persistent intercession, and faithfully guiding others through immense challenges, even when they resist. Faith in the face of the impossible. Moses led millions through a desert, parted a sea, and brought water from a rock. He faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles with unwavering faith in God's power. In moments of loneliness, doubt, or overwhelming challenge, remember that just as God was I am with Moses, he is with you. His presence is your ultimate resource, guiding you through your own wildernesses. When you encounter situations that seem impossible, that defy logic and human capacity, Moses' life compels us to lean into faith, believing that with God, even the Red Sea can be divided. God's presence is your strength. From the burning bush to the pillar of cloud and fire, God's presence was Moses' constant companion and ultimate strength. Part 11. Moses' enduring legacy. Moses, from a hidden basket to a royal palace, from a solitary shepherd to the leader of a liberated nation. He wrestled with God, with Pharaoh, and with his own people, yet he completed the mission. He faced his own fears, his limitations, and the ultimate denial of his greatest desire, but his faith never truly broke. From the shores of the Nile to the summit of Mount Nebo, he carried one singular, profound truth. God's call, when embraced, can transform anyone into a force for destiny. His leadership brought freedom to millions. His encounter with God delivered the sacred law, and his life stands as an eternal testament to divine faithfulness and human struggle. Are you wrestling with a daunting task? Moses' courage whispers, "Step forward." Are you doubting your own voice? His story echoes, "God will speak through you." Feeling like you've been overlooked or inadequate? Moses' life shouts, "God uses the unlikely." And trusting his power is worth everything, even if the promised land is only seen from afar. His story shines as an enduring beacon, proclaiming one essential truth for all time. Listening to God's call. Thank you for watching.